What if I told you that your job could be traumatizing you and you might not even know it? Not in some dramatic, acute way, but rather in a slow, quiet, cumulative way. The kind where you don't notice how much you've changed until someone who loves you points it out. Or until you finally hit a wall that you just cannot push through anymore. Secondary traumatic stress is one of the most underrecognized and underdiscussed contributors to burnout in high achieving professionals. It just doesn't get talked about enough. Nobody teaches us this in school, and because it's invisible, most of us have been living with its effects without a name for them. And today, we're going to change that. Welcome to Burnout-Free Me, your success and well-being podcast. I'm Dr. Amy Grimm, and I am so glad you're here. Let's go from burnout to breakthrough together. Hi, friends! Welcome back to Burnout-Free Me. This is episode number 148. I'm Dr. Amy Grimm. I am a veterinarian, a success coach, and your podcast host. And if you are here, you are someone who cares about understanding yourself, cares about doing the inner work, and building a life that doesn't run on fumes. And you know what? I love that about you. Now, a quick reminder before we dive in, if you are not yet on my Substack, please come join me. It's Amy Grimm, Burnout-Free Me. I just started writing there in April, and this month, for Mental Health Awareness Month, I'm writing companion pieces to every episode, including expanded content, my own personal stories, and tools you can actually use. So I'll be doing a deeper written piece on everything we cover today, and if you want more, that is where to go. And also, if the show has been valuable to you, please take 30 seconds to rate, review, and subscribe. It genuinely helps other women find this community. Okay, so last episode, we talked about trauma terminology. We built a foundation. We talked about what it means to be trauma-informed. We covered the ACE study, and we introduced the 3 types of traumatic stress, which were primary, secondary, and environmental. And if you haven't listened to that episode yet, I really encourage you to go back and start there, because today's episode builds directly on it. We are going to go all in on secondary traumatic stress today. What it actually is, what makes you more vulnerable to it, how to recognize it in yourself, and what you can start doing about it. So I'm calling it the invisible wound because that's exactly what it is. So let me start with an analogy that drives me crazy. It's the one with the frog in the pot. You've probably all heard it. If you put a frog in boiling water, it jumps out immediately. But if you put it in cool water and you slowly turn up the heat, it doesn't register the danger until it's too late. So, this has been completely disproven. It is not true at all. But I still think it works as an analogy for us today. You know, secondary traumatic stress works exactly like the frog in the pot if it were real. So it's not usually a dramatic single moment. It is gradual. It is slow. And it accumulates over time in ways that are often invisible to the person experiencing it. And most people don't realize how far they've gone until they've already crossed their threshold. So, what exactly is secondary traumatic stress? Here's the definition I want you to hold on to. It is the emotional duress that results from hearing about or being exposed to somebody else's first-hand trauma. More technically, it happens when witnessing or absorbing another person's traumatic experience, which causes your own nervous system to activate. So your own stress response fires up. It kicks in, even though the traumatic event didn't happen directly to you. And this is not just a psychological experience. It is physiological. Your heart rate increases. You might feel nauseous or unsettled. You can notice your own chest tightening. Your body is responding to what you are witnessing, even if your brain is trying to stay professional and detached. So here's what happens neurologically. When your nervous system gets activated by somebody else's trauma, whether that's listening to a patient's story or reading a difficult case, maybe you're watching something distressing, you're somehow absorbing another person's grief, your little amygdala encodes that experience along with the emotional charge it carried. And then in the future, anytime you encounter something with even a slight sensory similarity to that experience, so a similar story, a similar situation, a similar emotional tone, a similar smell, your brain reads it as a threat. Your body remembers, and it starts responding before your conscious mind has even had a chance to catch up. This is why secondary traumatic stress can be so disorienting. You might find yourself reacting to things that feel disproportionate. And also, you don't understand why. So for those of us in vet med, secondary traumatic stress is practically baked into the job description. We are absorbing the grief of families at some of the hardest moments of their lives. We're also navigating outcomes that are sometimes heartbreaking and sometimes unavoidable. And we carry the weight of cases that don't leave our brains when we walk out the door. And this is not only a veterinary issue. Any woman in a high-demand career where she is regularly exposed to the suffering, the struggles, or the difficult stories of others is at risk. So social workers, nurses, teachers, therapists, HR professionals, leaders who hold the emotional weight of their teams, this applies to you too. So let's talk about risk factors, because not everyone who is exposed to secondary trauma will be affected equally. Now, there's a really useful framework for thinking about this that looks at 8 overlapping categories that contribute to your overall threshold for tolerating work-related stress. You can think of it like a Venn diagram of vulnerability. The more of these categories that are activated in your life, the lower your capacity to absorb more stress without breaking down. Now, the first 2 we already touched on last episode. The one is direct exposure, so that means primary traumatic stress that has happened to you, personally or professionally. And then there's indirect exposure, which is secondary traumatic stress from absorbing the experiences of others. Those are givens for a lot of people in caregiving and helping roles. Now, the third category on this Venn diagram are your personal circumstances. So this includes your history, including your own ACE score, which we talked about last week, your personality, your coping style, and what is happening in your life right now. If you are going through something hard personally, like dealing with your own health challenges, caring for a sick family member, navigating a difficult relationship or breakup. Your threshold for absorbing stress at work is going to be lower. We do not leave our personal lives at the door. They come with us, and they color everything that we see and experience. The fourth category is work-related grief and loss. For anyone in a helping or caregiving profession, this is almost unavoidable. Outcomes can hurt. Patients or clients that you cannot help enough. Colleagues who leave because of burnout. Changes in your workplace that feel like losses. We're all human, and we grieve things that happen in our professional lives, even when we're told and we logically know that we shouldn't take it personally. Now, the fifth category is what some researchers call empathic strain, which you may also know as compassion fatigue. This is the profound emotional and physical exhaustion that develops when you have been giving so much of yourself to others for so long that your empathy starts to erode. And it's not that you stop caring, it's that the well keeps being drawn from and it stops being replenished. The gradual erosion of your ability to feel hope and connection is not just for others, but for yourself as well. So that's a big one. Now, the sixth category is systems failure. And this one, I'll be honest, it makes my blood boil a little, and I suspect it might do the same for you, because systems failure is the red tape, the bureaucracy, the rules and restrictions that prevent you from giving the quality of care that you know your clients or patients need and deserve. In veterinary medicine, this can look like financial barriers that limit treatment options, maybe navigating conversations about the spectrum of care, or working within institutional constraints that feel at odds with what you know is right for the animal. In other fields, it might be insurance denials, crushing caseloads, or being told to do things that conflict with your professional judgment. And related to this is something called moral distress, which is what happens when you are asked or required to do things that are fundamentally conflicted with your values. So this is one of the most underappreciated sources of burnout and empathic strain across helping professionals, and in fact, it is incredibly common. Now, the seventh category are your working conditions. How are you actually experiencing your workplace day to day? This includes your relationship with your supervisor and your colleagues, whether you feel appreciated and fairly compensated. It also includes your workload and whether your workplace feels psychologically safe. Unsupported or depleting working conditions are one of the most direct contributors to burnout, and they compound everything else on the list. And the eighth category is what's called socio-cultural context. So that's the intersection of race, gender, cultural identity, sexual orientation, religious beliefs, and historical trauma that shapes how you experience your work and your workplace. So maybe you're being asked to take on tasks outside your role because of your identity. Maybe you lack representation. Maybe you belong to a group that experiences ongoing discrimination. These things add real weight to your threshold, and they are not separate from the conversation about burnout and traumatic stress. Now, as a coach, I want to add one more factor to this list that I think is critically important, and that is your mindset about stress. We will do a full episode on this at some point, but here's the short version. How you think about stress, whether you believe stress is harmful and to be avoided, or whether you believe it can be channeled and managed, has a measurable impact on how stress actually affects you. Research shows that people who hold a stress is enhancing mindset have meaningfully better health and performance outcomes than those who hold a stress is harmful mindset, even when their actual stress levels are the same. So your beliefs about stress are shaping your experience of it too. That is not woo, that is neuroscience. Okay, so how do you actually know if you are experiencing secondary traumatic stress? This is where I want you to really pay attention, because one of the biggest barriers to getting help is not recognizing that you need it. Many helping professionals and caregivers don't identify secondary traumatic stress in themselves, either because they didn't know it was a thing, or because they never thought of their work as a form of chronic, low-intensity trauma exposure. I was in that camp for a long time. I could point to moments after the fact, cases that sat with me longer than they should have, a creeping cynicism I couldn't shake, a hypervigilance that started bleeding into my personal life. And only once I actually had the language to talk about it did those experiences start to make sense. And the symptoms of secondary traumatic stress often overlap with the symptoms of PTSD, even if you don't meet the full diagnostic criteria. And they generally fall into 3 categories. So the first is intrusive symptoms. This can be unwanted memories, distressing thoughts, physical reactions to reminders of the trauma, anything that brings up that distress. The second is avoidance. That is when you find yourself pulling back from people, avoiding certain conversations. Maybe you stay too busy to actually slow down and feel, or you just numb out completely. Whatever it is, you are avoiding. And the third one, that is arousal. So that's when you're irritable, you have a shorter fuse, maybe you have difficulty concentrating or trouble sleeping. And it's this feeling that you're just always on edge. Now, in day-to-day life, secondary traumatic stress can look like becoming overly emotionally involved with a client or patient and struggling to enforce appropriate boundaries. And it can also look like the complete opposite, which is detaching, distancing, feeling numb or cynical about the work you used to love. It can also look like a preoccupation that follows you home. You're thinking about a case or a client outside of work hours in a way that feels intrusive and hard to shake. It can also look like hopelessness or pessimism creeping in. It can look like challenges showing up in your personal relationships. You're being really short or snarky with your partner, and you're struggling to be present with your kids. And this next one, it's particularly striking to me because it can look like hypervigilance that spills into your personal life, where your worldview starts to shift because of what you have been repeatedly exposed to at work. It's like your sense of normal, what is safe, what is likely, can just get distorted where you are regularly in contact with suffering. So, Those are 3 categories, and now I'm going to give you another 3 categories that have to do with warning signs. So these are things to watch out for in yourself. So number 1 is physical warning signs that include things like exhaustion that doesn't resolve with rest, insomnia, frequent headaches, gastrointestinal issues, and even physical tension or pain that does not seem to have a clear cause. Number 2 is behavioral warning signs, and that includes increased irritability, short temper, lower tolerance for small talk or connection, you're withdrawing from colleagues or social situations, and you can even have an impaired appetite. And then number 3 are the emotional and psychological warning signs, which include emotional exhaustion, depression, anxiety, hopelessness, guilt, cynicism, resentment, and also a sense of depersonalization, which is where you're feeling disconnected from yourself or your work or the people around you. Now, I want to name something here that I think matters. None of this is the fault of your clients or your patients or the people on your team or the people in your life who are struggling. They are not doing anything wrong by sharing their pain with you. This is a natural consequence of doing work that involves proximity to suffering and also to other people. So the goal is not to stop caring. The goal is to understand what is happening so that both you and the people you serve or who you work with can get the support that you actually need. So, what are you going to do about it? The good news is that there are real evidence-based strategies that help. And I'm going to give you the starting point today with the understanding that this is a big enough topic that we'll keep returning to it. The foundation is what you've probably heard of as self-care, but I want to reframe it slightly because self-care is not quite right. It's something we see on social media, but it doesn't cover everything. And what I want to reframe this to is more like nervous system maintenance. This is when you regulate your own nervous system. So every single day, your nervous system is doing hard work. It needs to be actively supported. And that means things like prioritizing sleep, genuinely prioritizing it, not just talking about it. And it also includes some other fundamental, basic things like regular movement, eating in ways that fuel your body, having breathing practices and relaxation techniques that help your nervous system down-regulate. And none of these things are luxuries. They are the baseline. And importantly, none of them should cost you money. These are things that you can do for yourself. It's not a wellness program trying to sell you a solution. These are things that you can do for yourself as a human being. Now, beyond those basics, it's also about becoming aware of your own warning signs and learning to catch them early before you cross that threshold and you end up in full burnout. And that really requires knowing yourself. Knowing what your physical tells are, knowing what your behavioral patterns look like when you're running on empty, and knowing what you need to step back and ask for support or do something to actively discharge the stress that you've been carrying. And this is exactly the work that I do with my coaching clients. So if this resonates with you and you want support, you can come find me at my website, Burnout-Free Me, and I would be happy to chat with you. Awareness is truly the first step. You cannot respond to something you haven't named, and now you have a name for it, and you're aware of it. Okay, my friends. So that's a wrap for today. We covered a lot of ground today. Secondary traumatic stress, the 8 risk factors that can really shape your threshold, including your mindset, what the symptoms actually look like in life, and where to start when it comes to taking care of yourself. So I really hope this episode landed in a way that feels useful and maybe even a little validating, because you deserve to understand what has been happening in your body and your brain. Remember, May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and this is the work. Not just some awareness campaign, but this is the actual information, the actual language, the understanding of yourself that makes the change possible for you. So I'm really glad that we got to do these 2 episodes together this month. If you're watching on video, I hope you like my cute outfit. I recorded both of these episodes back to back, so I am wearing the same thing and proud of it. And once again, if you want to go deeper on any of this stuff, come find me, Amy Grimm, Burnout-Free Me on Substack, because I'm going to be writing companion pieces to each episode and sharing more of my own story. And final thing, if this podcast has been meaningful to you, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It truly helps other women find this show. Okay, thank you, friends, and I will see you in the next episode. Welcome to Burnout-Free Me, your success and well-being podcast. I'm Dr. Amy Grimm, and I am so glad you're here. Let's go.